Everyone, thank you very much for coming. Welcome to Biotechnology Needs a Security Update. We'll appreciate you being with us here today. So my name is Edward Perello. I'm the founder of Desktop Genetics. It's a London-based company. We're building tools for CRISPR genome engineering.
Hi everybody, I'm Piers Millett. I'm principal of Biosecurity Limited, a UK-based company that helps safeguard the bioeconomy.
Hello, my name is Ed Yu. I'm a supervisory special agent from the FBI's Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate, where we do a lot of programs and outreach to the community on biosecurity.
And I'm Megan Palmer. I'm a senior research scholar at the Center for International Security and Cooperation, which is at Stanford University. And we're really developing knowledge tools for a safer world, working across disciplines in a number of technology areas, including biotech.
So we've all got put together a number of slides. We're each going to spend a few minutes walking you through different aspects of the work that we're doing, and then we're going to hand it over to the audience. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the advanced biotechnologies that are currently in use by laboratories and community biotech spaces all over the world today. So the first and foremost is DNA synthesis, otherwise known in the media as 3D DNA printing. Basically, this is like the workhorse technology that we use to literally string together the A's, T's, C's, and G's that build up synthetic DNA code. So what you might do is you may sequence the genome of an organism, and then you may decide to make some modifications to that, and then you can print that in the lab and then insert that new synthetic DNA directly into cells. So you can very easily translate digital biology into physical biology. Now, underpinning this is genetic design software. So what you're seeing here, this is a screenshot of one of the tools that we built at Desktop Genetics. But there's a whole ecosystem of different tools, each allowing you to do different things. This one lets you go in and make a very precise modification. And so these tools effectively are like the text editors or like the Microsoft packages that you get. And biologists use these pretty much every day. So what do they do with it? Well, they can do a number of things, one of which is building synthetic organisms. So this is a screenshot from the Synthetic Yeast Genome Project, which is a multilateral international collaboration to refactor the genome of yeast. So yeast is a workhorse microbe. It's used to study cancer. It's used for bioproduction, beer, and all sorts of good things. Now what these guys are doing, essentially domesticating yeast. In the same way that the wolf has been turned into a dog, these guys are simplifying the genetic code of the yeast in order to make it more accessible and more useful in the lab. Another technology that you might have heard of is genome editing. So this is CRISPR. You might have seen Jennifer Doudna's talk, her keynote recently here at South by Southwest. Now this is a technology that allows you to make precise modifications, not to say synthetic organisms, but to already existing organisms. So you can go and modify DNA, you can swap out pieces. It's effectively a molecular find and replace tool for DNA, and it can be used in human cells, and that's being explored both for research purposes and also for clinical purposes. Now, it's not just scientists in white lab coats in universities and pharmaceutical companies who are using these technologies. There is an open biotechnology movement associated closely with citizen science. It might be known as the DIY bio movement. This gentleman here is David Ishii, and he's speaking at a conference here called Biohack the Planet, which brings together these kind of incredible people who want to use biotechnology outside of a university setting to do something that has social good. And so his point was, you should biohack your dog because we've spent thousands of years breeding in all these horrible diseases into them, and using some of these other technologies, we can easily get rid of them and give them a better quality of life. This is a DIY bacterial gene engineering kit. This is built by a guy called Josiah Zana, and he runs the Odin Institute. And you can buy for $150 everything you need, almost everything you need, to do CRISPR genome engineering in your kitchen, which is totally radical if you would speak to a normal biologist about it. Now, when I tell people about these things, they usually say this: that sounds like it could be dangerous, and they're kind of right. Like, it definitely sounds like it could be dangerous. There's a lot of weird-sounding technologies, things which are kind of spooky, they're very powerful, and most people will very quickly want to call up all their friends and be like, "Oh my God, this is ridiculous. these scientists, these biohackers are doing crazy things. Should we really let this happen? And they have some pretty legitimate concerns when it comes to biology, one of which is the fact that biology is pretty nasty. It can do some horrible things, right? So on the left, you've got an image from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which killed millions of people globally. On the right, that's a scene from West Africa in one of the Ebola clinics. And this is just normal biology. It's not biotech, but it just demonstrates that biology can do some bad stuff. And the open nature of science means that you can download the genomes for both of these microorganisms, these viruses. So that's the Ebola virus. You can get it online. And given the power of genome editing, given the power of DNA synthesis, the availability, the democratization of these technologies, this might be cause for concern for some. And occasionally, even researchers who are trying to stop diseases can make mistakes. So these are some scenes from the 2007 foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK. We have a number of labs who are working on vaccines for this disease that affects farm animals. And it escaped because of some leaky pipes, and many thousands of animals had to be culled. In other cases, you see people deliberately misusing biology. So this is a letter that was sent to a senator in 2001. It contained anthrax spores, and I think 5 people died, and a number of other people came down with illness. The point, however, is just that our biology is generally vulnerable to other biology. We're built of this same stuff that wants to kill us. And when we talk about biotech and we talk about all these advanced technologies, if you freak out about it, there's a risk that you may say, we should shut it all down. And that's a problem because there's actually a lot of other bad biological things that happen to us normally. So you've got horrible genetic diseases. This gentleman top left has ALS. On the right, you see cancer cells. On the left, at the bottom, crop failure, and of course, old age. Right? So biology just tends to get us no matter what we try and do. And importantly, this biotechnology, everything I've just described, is really one of the only ways to safeguard our biology. Right? It allows us to apply everything that we've learned about it and turn it into a technology. And this is pretty important when you think about its relevance in the global bioeconomy. Right? Everything that we eat, lots of things that we wear, our furniture, our cars, our oil-based economy, everything comes from biology, and it's worth $2.2 trillion, and it's growing all the time. And the entire bioeconomy is at stake if we have a gut reaction and we fear these technologies and say, these people can't do this, right? They can't use this technology, or this specific kind of group can't use this technology. And so my concern is that if we do freak out and we do phone up all our friends and say, this is bad, then we'll put all of these things at risk. Another key question is, who do we let have access to these different technologies? So there are different profiles of practitioners of the biosciences, right? And it's very difficult to say who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. People have different motivations. And biology isn't really an inherently dangerous technology, right? It's a tool. And different actors are going to use those tools in different ways. In the same way that a hammer can be used for construction, it could also be used for hitting someone on the head. And that's what you've got to think about when it comes to biotech. So I think biotech does need a security update, and these fine people are going to explain more about why. But I think before they do, it's just important that we're aware that our attitudes to this discussion will shape the development of this technology and how we use it in industrial biology, and of course medical biology as well. So I'd say let's update our attitudes and let's spread that word. Piers.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how some of these advanced biotechnologies are challenging the international regimes we've put in place to look at this technology and keep us using it safely, securely, and sustainably. I'm going to talk to you about digitization of biology, and by that I mean our ability to translate biological artifact into digital data and back again. Perhaps the best example of that you've heard a little bit about is our ability to read genetic material and to convert that into digital data and then to use synthesis technology to print it back into biological artifact. That allows us to effectively scan something like a virus in one place, email the digital data, print it again in a second location. There are some folks, for example, Craig Venter, who suggested we could use this in the search for extraterrestrial space, for life in space. We are already using that technology to move viruses around the world. It underpins the way we make our seasonal flu vaccines. So when you get your flu shot, when it comes around to winter, it's built upon this sort of technology. I wanted to bring this up because its real relevance here in this biosecurity discussion is that our ability to use these technologies is far outpacing our ability to think about how to do that safely, securely, and sustainably. In the context of biosecurity, which we're talking about today, there are two approaches that we can use. We can either try and stop the bad guys from getting things they may use to cause harm by preventing that, or we can build our capacity to respond should the worst case happen. That's both the capabilities to have a prompt emergency response and the tools to research and build them in the first place. This is really important. We have to do it at the international level. Biosecurity is only one form of disease, and as we know from outbreaks every year, that they do not respect national borders, and this really is an international issue. One of the things that we try and do at the international level is to control access to certain things. There's a group, the Australia group, that sets out these regulations and controls through licenses the movement of certain types of equipment and certain types of pathogens. And as a good example, if I wanted to take one of these pathogens back to the UK from the US, I'd need to get a license from both my government and from your government. If I wanted to scan that virus here and to email the data back and then print it when I got back home, I wouldn't need a license to do that. If I wanted to scan that virus here and then print out the DNA and then take that back home with me, I'd need a license to do that. On the other hand, if I did that and then just removed a little bit, even if it didn't have any functional change, I wouldn't need a license to do that. So the point of this is that actually this is not a very effective way to stop bad guys from getting bad things and using them to cause harm in the world where we have digitized biology. Something else we could do is to try and control information. So scientists sat down over a decade ago to look at that, and they came to this conclusion, which is that it's not really a practical idea, it's not a very good idea, and actually probably that horse has already bolted. You've already heard that most of this sequence information is already online. The important factor here was that this information is also really, really useful. We use it in that public health response. It helps us to have that capacity. This next slide shows two graphs. The one on the left shows you how many samples of Ebola were coming out on a monthly basis from that big public health emergency in West Africa. The graph on the right shows how many of those sequences were actually published. As you can see, we're not sharing the sort of biological information that would help us have that effective response. The interesting thing is we're not sharing it because of security concerns. It's not we're worried about terrorists or bad guys from using that information. It's actually the scientists themselves at the moment that are not sharing that data. They're worried that if they make that sequence available too quickly, that others will be able to use it and get the high-profile publications that they rely on for their career. Or indeed that somebody else will come along and product write or put intellectual property on that virus or some important function of that virus, which could lead to potentially big money and financial rewards for them. And it's not just scientists that are worried about that. Countries are worried about it too. Pretty much every country in the world, except for the US, has negotiated a treaty about sharing the benefits from genetic resources. The problem here is the way they've defined genetic resources is about physical material. So once again, with the digitization of biology, we can effectively scan that material and email it, circumventing an entire international regime. I wanted to highlight this not because these technologies necessarily are letting bad guys do something that they weren't able to do before, but because it's fundamentally challenging these international regimes. Digitization of biology, for example, is challenging the export controls that stem from the Biological Weapons Convention. They're challenging the international health regulations that come out of the World Health Organization and the international health regulations. And they're also challenging the Nagoya Protocol on benefit sharing that sits under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And it's those challenges to those international regimes that mean that I believe that it's time that biotechnology had a security reboot. Ed. Thanks.
Okay, so from the outset, I'm just going to lay out that from an FBI perspective, we recognize that there's so much promise and benefit to be gained on where science and the life sciences is taking us, that it's really incumbent upon us now to make sure that we safeguard it, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. I guess the first thing is when you saw on the agenda that the FBI is here, maybe this came to mind. You know, this is Hollywood showcasing us, and I'm sorry if I disappoint you all. But in a lot of ways, I think I'm actually better than them because my background is I'm a biochemist and molecular biologist before I joined the FBI. But I want to start on that note just to showcase, and this is a shameless plug, that a cornerstone of our program is this position called the W&D coordinator, and they're going to factor very importantly in safeguarding science. These are special agents, men and women, that are trained in chemical, biological, and radiological nuclear matters, and what their key responsibility is that we have one of these individuals, at least one, located in each of our 56 field offices across the US. And they are, for all intents and purposes, a local ambassador that establishes points of contacts in state and local law enforcement, public health, the first responder community, but then really build partnerships with universities, with companies, organizations, and even this growing DIY amateur biology community. And I'm happy to showcase that the assistant W&D coordinator from our Austin field office is right here in the audience. So if anything, please take away that not only are we going to talk about safeguarding science, but there really is a point of contact that you can really talk brass tacks about what it means at the FBI. And you know, we already talked a little bit about, you know, when the first thing you talk about biological threats, the first thing is, well, is someone going to engineer the zombie apocalypse virus? But bear in mind that, you know, synthetic biology and other new convergences in life sciences bring something new too. So here's an example where they engineered a baker's yeast, basically, and it can take sugar and process it to the precursors for opioid products. Fantastic for the healthcare industry because there's a big demand for pain control medications. But can you imagine if this ever got out of the box? It's not just about terrorists now, but now we're looking at about criminal organizations. There's a huge incentive to exploit and abuse this type of capability for drug cartels, for example, that have very, very broad resources. And I showcase this because we're sort of on the verge of, you know, the Breaking Bad challenge to brewing bad. But it's something that we need to take into consideration. Here is a slightly different close call. Here is an instance where a reporter used an email address and a personal credit card and emailed a DNA sequence order to a company, and within a month got his order in the mail, and inside that little plastic vial was the DNA for smallpox. And his resulting story was, oh my God, the laws aren't there to protect a bad guy from ordering smallpox or Ebola and getting in the mail. Actually, the order was very harmless. It was only a short sequence, but you know, the damage was done. There was a huge political and policy discussions after this, and as a result, companies start now screening incoming DNA orders to figure out what they're making and who they're selling it to. But one rapid, interesting point is that some of the companies that identify what they called suspicious orders, especially ones that maybe come from overseas, they were at their wits' end as, okay, who do they contact then? It's not like you can report that to the local police department. And that's where those all-important W&D coordinators came in. And so now the industry knows that at least there's somebody within the FBI who can not only provide assistance in the threat assessment, but can also marshal the resources to bring in the CDC, render assistance to the private sector. And this aspect is very well received by industry. And here is another challenge. This is you. And this is not a comment on your personal hygiene, but this is the life we live right now. What I mean by this picture is that you leave behind aspects of yourself, either intentionally or intentionally. Your DNA. When you throw away a used water bottle, there's a little bit of your DNA on the part where you just left your, on your lips. Some of you may subscribe to online services like ones that track your family tree and your genealogy or health diagnostics. But that information is going out there. There's also the fact that wearable technology is tracking your biological day-to-day. How much sleep are you getting? How much exercise are you getting? What's your caloric intake? And the fact is that there are apps that are coming out on this right now. Pretty soon, this is going to become a biological sensor. It's going to collect data, transmit data, analyze it for you. And we're already pushing forward on this on the healthcare side, where electronic health records information is going to be very valuable, because the biggest part of biology right now is going to be targeted, as Eddie mentioned, is going to be how do you provide targeted, customized healthcare. But unfortunately, what this also means is that this, again, goes beyond just the viruses and bacteria and toxins, but the bad guys now know that as of today, your biological data is worth more than your financial information. And that's something that really hasn't gotten across just yet. And here's a challenge, that if you're a victim of identity theft today, you can change your credit card, you can change your PIN code access number, and if you have a financial loss, maybe the financial institution can sort of make you whole again. But if your health record information, or especially if your genetic information is taken and is exfiltrated, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no getting it back, there's no correction, there's no way to make you whole again. So that, again, that's a security vulnerability that we haven't really quite discussed. So we do a lot of engagement, as I said, to the broad swath of community, to students, to biohackers, to industry, and there are three fundamental points that we put across, and it's significant, it's important for all of them. One is to basically have fun, and this is really relevant for this venue at South by Southwest, is be passionate about what you're doing. There's so much to be gained, there's so much benefit that can gleaned, not only in the US, but worldwide. And then also, how do you become guardians of science? I mean, it's not only just being true, faithful to the science, but understand that unfortunately there are outside forces out there that will try to exploit, misuse, and abuse some of the powerful technologies that are coming online and have access to it. So how do you be on the lookout for that, and how do you protect this growing, powerful capability? And then also, ultimately, pass it on. How do we make sure that once we establish this citizenship of science, how do you make sure we pass it on to those who come after us? How do you all become mentors to be on the lookout, but then also that you equip the generations that come after us to make sure that as we become further down the line on this future bioeconomy, biotechnology, that we truly become the best stewards that we can be today. And with this outreach, this is going to be, Megan's going to talk a little bit more, but we also engage this international synthetic biology competition. And one of the profound impacts of the FBI engagement is that you actually see young student teams, undergraduate level, high school level, not only embracing the security message, but now they're actually coming up with security solutions. And that's phenomenal. That's a home run. So it's going to be this next up-and-coming generation and the creativity that exists in places like this to come up with some powerful security solutions, the likes of which that even the governments are not going to be able to come up with. And you know you're hitting a home run when even the biohacker community is willing to, hey, let's invite our friendly local neighborhood W&D coordinator to our events. And it really just showcases that it truly is a partnership in moving forward and making sure that we truly can safeguard science in an effective manner. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Thanks all. Who's excited? Who's terrified? Who's kind of both excited and terrified? Great, I think we're at the right spot in the conversation. So a lot of the scientific community has been really excited about some of the advances in the field that have allowed all of their questions to be easier to answer. And so you'll see an example of this. This is Science Magazine from just over a year ago in December 2015, where they're calling these advances in gene editing the breakthrough of the year, right? And you'll see that this has become popularized with scientists like Jennifer Doudna coming here to South by Southwest and talking about this potential. But the scientific community is also a little bit worried. So if you look in very tiny font at the top of this cover, you'll see a sentence that says managing biological risk. And so this is an article that my colleagues and I at Stanford wrote that basically spoke about the issues of being short-sighted when it comes to some of the biosecurity issues that we have put on the table today. And this is not just the scientific community, but it's really the scientific community and government working together, only seeing the problems of today and not necessarily the problems of tomorrow. So how are we going to build the capacity to see long term? So in a world where we envision anybody being able to engineer biology, who is going to be responsible for biosecurity? So who thinks it's going to be Ed? Oh no, that's okay, who thinks it's going to be Eddie? Oh no, more confidence in Eddie. So I think it's probably going to be you. And why should it be you? Why is it going to be everyone? Does anybody know who this is? Who? Clapper, right? So former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who raised these issues to the highest levels and said, you know, advances in including genome editing are really, you know, aggravating catastrophic threats to the US. And this sort of puzzled both the scientific community and government alike to know what exactly this meant. And really how to respond. And the issue is that how do we respond when these are technologies that are in the hands of everyone, right? So this is the iGEM competition. I'll explain this in just a little bit, right? And how do we manage technologies that are really manifesting on a global scale? So one of the ways I like to think about this, I'm sure lots of you guys read XKCD, right? So I love this image. This is a real inspiration for my work. And it tries to map out you know, communities on the internet, online communities. So I think about this image and, you know, who are the organizations that are influencing the norms and behaviors of this field? Who says what's okay or what's not okay? Or at least informing and challenging our ideas of what we should do with technology? Who is going to be the Facebook of the biotech community? And so where do we start on building these challenges? We've already talked about limits in both controlling the materials today, limits in controlling the information as a result of being able to interchange between these two domains. And so I really think that the answer to tackling some of these questions really starts with understanding, motivating, and empowering the people who will be leading the biotech revolution so that they are excited about having biosecurity be part of their mission. So I want to give you 4 vignettes about building biosecurity leaders. And these aren't people who care about just biosecurity, but as we said, who really care about advancing the field and care about security writ large as part of what they do. I'm going to speak a little bit about working with scientists and engineers, the next generation of scientists and engineers in this space, working with the next generation professionals, both in science and in policy, and then the last one about working with really anyone that wants to build with biology. So the first of these is the iGEM competition. Who of you have heard of the iGEM competition? Most of you haven't. Who's heard of the first robotics competition? More of you? Okay, so the idea here, I did first when I was in high school. The idea is you get a kit of parts and you build a robot that plays a game. I'm Canadian, so we had to build a robot that plays hockey. So you build a robot, plays hockey against another robot that plays hockey, and whoever wins gets a prize. We got last place, but it was a formative experience in my life. And a lot of the people who participated wanted to do the same thing for biotechnology. So the iGEM competition, which started about 13 years ago, when I started grad school at MIT, it started at MIT, and they wanted to give kids parts, and they could build living biological machines. They don't play games against each other, because that would be a really bad idea, but rather, these kids are allowed to basically build machines that do anything useful, from making bioplastics, to making a new diagnostic, to making a new type of beer. And so this is spread across the world now, and we last year I think had 300 teams from 42 countries participating in this competition, so it's really spread across the globe. And one of the most exciting things about this competition is we don't give awards just for making cool stuff, but we give awards for integrating questions like security, responsibility, policy, ethics, justice into the technologies and practices. And so it ends up that people get really excited then about not just technology, but also security, policy, ethics, justice. And you see new types of communities that actually start their engagement in this field, often around these security engagements. Right? So they are excited about taking these technologies into their local communities and solving local problems. And here is an example of some kids that work between Ed and Eddie, where their project actually involved working both with the FBI and biotech companies to try and identify potential vulnerabilities and problems in their systems and then solve them. Right? So we see new types of partnerships amongst the next generation in coming up with security solutions. What happens when these kids grow up? This is one program that I and others have worked on. It's called the Synthetic Biology Leadership Excellence Accelerator Program, or LEAP. But this selects people working all across the biotech ecosystem who want to pursue not just their next project to integrate security and other types of issues, but really throughout their careers. This is really exciting. This is at Asilomar. This is where some of the leaders, the founders of molecular biology just came together. And you'll see some of these young leaders, some of which are in the audience today and on this panel today, that are also meeting with the FBI. And over in the corner, you'll see a former special assistant to the president on biosecurity. And they propose solutions, things they want to pursue through their careers that engage much broader communities in issues of biosecurity. This is the flip example. This is a professional emerging leaders program, but for people mostly working in government, in policy, who want to know more about technology. And so we brought them out to Stanford to learn about the cutting edge of the field. And you'll see them here working in a brand new building in our campus that is advancing, right, biotechnology for the next generation, learning about the very cutting edge of these tools. So what does this mean for you? Maybe you have never thought about biotechnology. Maybe you don't have access to these things. This is another opportunity that's trying to engage a much wider group of technologists and of makers all around the world. Who has heard of the Fab Academy? Right? Some of you, maker spaces all around the world. So this is a new class that was piloted, I guess, 2 years ago. And it is the MIT Media Lab working with the Fab Academy on a class that was inspired by the class How to Make Almost Anything. And this class is How to Grow Almost Anything. And it's really to allow anyone to get access to the tools of biotechnology. This is the existing network of makerspaces. Not all of these are working in biotech, but you can imagine there's going to be one in your community that you can go and have access to. And we teach a 12-week class, or I guess it was 15-week class, with the leaders in the field that basically teach you how to grow almost anything. And what's exciting about this class is the very first class talks about principles and practices. And those principles and practices include the cutting edge of thinking about how security is relevant to biotechnology proliferating around the world. And it occurs in unexpected spaces. So this is one community lab. I think this one is in Orlando. They're really small shops, but they're doing really incredible things. And again, the most exciting thing about it is that they're excited about it too. And security comes part and parcel with being a great biotechnologist. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Any closing comments before we open it to questions? All right, so we've got 2 rules on the Q&A session. The first, there is no such thing as a stupid question. We're here to help as much as we can. Science can be intimidating, but please ask anything you want. And the second rule is no filibustering. Please.
Thank you very much. Great panel. I think everybody, it seems, is in agreement that biotechnology needs a security upgrade. And I'd like to ask each of you, and please don't repeat what anybody else has said, if you were in charge of putting together a global comprehensive strategy for doing it, what would be the elements of that strategy?
Who wants to start? If you go last, we're at a disadvantage.
Well, I'll take it.
Sure.
So very first, ultimately, is that one, at least in the US, there really isn't a strategy to really truly make sure that we can invest the resources and really drive innovation in this space. There is no overarching strategy. So, and that also applies whether or not there be a global one as well. And to that point, though, if there is the definition or the drafting of a strategy, there has to be a component of security too. And I think we are all in agreement. It's not about dropping walls down. It's but basically how do we, again, it's a running theme, safeguarding it. And ultimately, if I had my way at a global level, we need more of someone like him, the W&D coordinators, because for someone like the FBI to provide that local resource, that only exists in the US. There really isn't anything like it anywhere else. And the other hat that we wear is we actually go out and engage our foreign law enforcement partners and try to build a W&D coordinator type capability. But we need, at the government level, law enforcement to truly understand how important this is and how badly it needs to be protected. It's not about dropping the hammer, it's about protecting the community members and the work that's coming out of it. That aspect of bandwidth absolutely needs to grow.
I'd probably say there are multiple elements to a strategy over multiple years and multiple communities. As we said, we don't have a biosecurity strategy. We have a bioeconomy strategy. We have a national security strategy. We even have a national security innovation strategy. But that national security innovation strategy doesn't mention biotechnology. So I think there's a few things. Most of my work is on the preventing bad things from happening and less on the response. I think there's a big response capacity that's needed because there will be accidents. There will be things that go wrong. But on the prevention side, I think there's a few things we can do. Some of it is actually baking it into the technical infrastructure, right? So what technology choices can we make so it's easier to both prepare, respond to many things that might happen? And then there's this social infrastructure bit of things. How do we actually train people to appreciate the challenges on both sides? So I think addressing both that social and the technical infrastructure within a strategy is going to be important. And I think in many cases, the fact that they're divorced means neither one is as good.
So I spent over a decade working for the UN trying to answer that question. So I think what I'll do is to tell you where I saw a big gap in that system. And that was the relationship with companies and with industry. We have rules and regulations quite often about what happens in academia that don't necessarily apply in industrial settings. And I think it's super important to reimagine how we build some of these arguments to better engage with companies and with industry, and to fit it into the way that they work and the things that they're interested in, and really build the business case for biosecurity.
So if you discuss security issues with biologists in a standard molecular biology lab and you say, hey, is what you're doing dangerous? And they'll probably laugh you out the room, right? And all their colleagues will laugh at you as well. And nothing illustrated this to me more when I used to work late at night. I'd come in at like 3 in the morning to work in a lab, and no one ever questioned why I was there. And then when I left that lab, the PI contacted me and said, hey, so I found out you were in my lab, and I was really concerned because I found out you were labeling your tubes incorrectly. And he still didn't know what I was doing, and I could have been doing anything. And the issue there is that there's really no culture of security. There's not enough eyes on target, and there's not enough training about these issues from an early age, or an early age when you start learning about biotechnology. I think iGEM is doing a very good job of changing that in the synthetic biology community, but I'd like to see that program rolled out to more general molecular biologists. The other issue is that really the US is the only country that has that kind of WMD coordinator capability. If someone in the UK sees a problem, then there's no one to call. Right? You don't call the police, and if you called the police, they would probably be scared because they're not trained to deal with these things. And I believe, Ed, someone in the UK contacted the FBI.
Actually, we've actually gotten contacts not only from other law enforcement, but yes, from the different scientific community, and even from the international biohacker community, because the message has gone out. They actually truly want to become citizens of science, but then they realize that there is no counterpart on the security side. So that's a failure in how we approach safeguarding this really important field.
Precisely. So I think these programs need to be rolled out internationally. And then the final thing is that you initially have to build good human resources, good human intelligence resources amongst biologists so that you can communicate with them well, and they can tell you when things are going wrong. But that's never really going to be enough, because with the digitization of biology, we're going to have to start building in signals intelligence into all of the tools that we're using so that we can flag up things that could be an issue. All right, next question.
Yes, my question is, what do you think, this specifically you at Edward, what do you think about services like 23andMe and Heritage as far as their privacy policy? Because someone mentioned, I forgot who it was, about how if someone has your DNA, then that's, it's out there. And I've heard that they don't, just pretty much, can you elaborate what you think about services like that?
I'll tell you what I did when I used that service. I made a fake email and a fake social media account, and I used a public computer to set it all up because I was concerned that my real information would be directly linked to that. And then I would also just question the security of the companies themselves. I'm sure that they are doing it as best that they can, but there's always going to be a vulnerability issue.
Right.
And so you have to be prepared to assume your data will escape.
Right. And I think that's ultimately, Eddie nailed it, is that existing policy addresses privacy, but we're talking about a whole different dimension about security now. So the policy has to catch up to where biotechnology is right now. There is quite a bit of work that has gone on and will continue to go on about protecting your privacy, but this aspect of biosecurity is really not fully recognized or being addressed. So it's a little bit different. I mean, we've engaged, this aspect we've pushed out and engaged the private sector, and there are quite a few security officials that totally see it, that this is a huge potential threat, risk to our economy. But as soon as they try to push it forward, they get pushed back because the response is, well, wait a minute, we're already meeting the policy requirements with regard to privacy. Why should I provide you more resources? It's not being required by the government. There's no policy that addresses it. So I don't see the return on investment. So there's a problem, and not only the broader definition of what we mean by biosecurity, how that impacts policy, how that impacts our private sector, and coming up with the appropriate solutions. So at present, the private sector probably thinks, they believe they're doing their due diligence, and as existing policies, they absolutely are. But we need experts like us to be part of that discussion on, well, where's it headed now? Where's it going to be 5, 10, 20 years down the line? We need to be a little more, have the long view on what the security issues are going to be.
Yeah, one more thing I'd add is, you touched on incentives.
Yeah.
If I go to my board of directors and say, hey, there's a security issue, can we invest $2 million in dealing with this? They'll say, well, do you think you could spend that money to make more money instead, right? And it's very difficult to convince business leaders of the need to do this,
right,
beyond just pure genomic analysis.
And then to flip it around, because we don't have a full understanding of the security issues, then that means that we're not providing you all, the consumer, the proper caveat emptor, the buyer beware. So it does probably mean that we need to redefine what does informed consent really actually mean. If we don't really fully know what the security risks are, then how adequately are we giving you the information to make an informed decision on how your data gets used?
Hi, this question is primarily for Officer Yu. When you think about 50,000 Americans dying from opioids and the fact that a lot of this stuff needs some significant infrastructure, I think, a lab, this technology, you can't just do it in a car trunk. Can you talk about successes we've had in terms of apprehensions and interdictions? Do we have statistics? How many people were arrested for this last year? What can you tell us in terms of, the flip side of teaching young people the good ethics is great, but there's also going to be bad actors. How is the enforcement going, officer?
Right, so on the biological aspect, fortunately there aren't any numbers because you're right, that capability still resides only in academia and in the private sector. Why I wanted to showcase that is that we have a window of opportunity that this is happening as we speak. What happens if the genie gets out of the bottle? So that becomes really problematic because I worry about what happens if you have a freeze-dried version of this modified microbe and all I have to do is give it to you and then you take it back and just have to ferment it and distill it, then that becomes a big challenge. How do you regulate sugar? So this is an opportunity to raise the level of awareness and maybe put up front some security measures, but if we don't address it, then it's going to put the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, local law enforcement in a bad way because you're right, we're facing with an opioid fentanyl epidemic as we speak. So if we can't even wrap our arms around the current issue, you can imagine what this scenario is going to look like. So again, fortunately, that hasn't happened yet, but what I'm showcasing is that we need to start looking at bio in this encompassing this aspect too, not just a terrorist engineering a pandemic-causing virus.
Hi. I worked with the BioWatch program for several years, and so my interest lay in the attack, an intentional attack with using a bioweapon. And I've often wondered, we talk about becoming aware of it or detecting it, that sort of thing. The part about what we're going to do and how it will be communicated to the public to avoid what could be even a worse situation, could be a little attack, and a whole city of several million people believe they're all at risk, and if you don't get the pills in time, you're going to die. That sort of scenario, and how how the public would be educated, how you would approach that. It's an overwhelming.
I think, personally, I think that we are suffering from an overly reactive posture right now to anything that might go wrong. And our risk tolerance when it comes to our own biology often is that, we cannot have any risks. And the reality is, there will be accidents, there will be things that go wrong intentionally, there will be things that go wrong unintentionally. And it is, I think we can't just have a posture where we're trying to educate people and say, like, it's gonna be okay. I think the most important thing is to actually have a working familiarity with what biotechnology is and might be. And that's one of the reasons I think these maker spaces, these community spaces where you can actually have real engagements with the technology, with the technologists, understand what's going on, develop that appreciation, not just by being told, but by experiencing it is incredibly important. So I think that having more people who can contextualize the things that go right and the things that go wrong is going to be important, and feel like they have a route to contribute. So that's a wish, and that's why I think these alternative types of engagements are incredibly important.
And to build off that a little bit, there was some recent studies, or very interesting studies done by the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC about who the public writ large trust to tell them that sort of information. And you won't be surprised that neither government nor industry were particularly trusted. But folks embedded within the community from those sort of community labs were seen largely as a useful interlocutor. They are both disinterested, neutral third parties and members of those communities that are discussing these issues, but at the same time also have a foot inside the technologies that they're talking about.
I think just one comment is, you said the public at large, and you said the public, it's the publics, and the way that you explain these concepts to different people is going to be very different, right? Respectfully, your Republican pastor in Nebraska is probably going to have very different opinions on biotechnology versus a stage 4 cancer patient in China. So there has to be a good understanding of what messages work with different publics.
And just one last word. I think that in terms of this idea that we're not free of risks already, it's one of the things we're working on is how do we understand the risks we're already exposed to, right? So living systems, biotechnology is trying to kill us, or biology is trying to kill us all the time already, right? So we're in a state where we have infectious diseases, we have other diseases that are trying, right, to kill us all the time. And so we're not in a state where if we do nothing, that we're safe and we're secure. And so that's a different type of the reason why health security and global security and infectious disease security has been coupled with biotechnology and security often is to appreciate the fact that if we do nothing, we're screwed already. So we need to get better than that.
So Ed, you touched on the idea of informed consent, but the business model of so many companies, and we've talked about this a little bit with 23andMe and other companies, center on them owning our data or at least controlling access to it. But their vulnerabilities are then also my vulnerabilities, and I don't own the data. So how do we create a world where the ability to control my own data is not, it becomes a justice issue, right? making sure that everyone can have access to it, not just the people who can afford the services that don't do that.
No, agreed. And again, this takes taking the thought process a little further out than where we're at right now, because I think unfortunately, and well, I should say unfortunately, there's you're deriving some immediate benefit, whether it be a diagnostic or an aspect of service of some kind. But you're absolutely right. What's lacking is looking at what does this mean further downstream, because at the end of the day, you're right. Someone has that data. You may be receiving some immediate benefit, but what's the cost benefit with the ownership of the data over time? And it means something completely different that if an infant, for some sort of prenatal testing provides that information now, what happens when they turn 18 later on in life? Do they have any idea who has access to that data? And it really is about empowering you all at the individual level. What does justice mean for you? But it also means that the FBI also needs to be empowered in our own way to be able to respond to injustices. If there is a criminal violation, although that hasn't even been defined in this space yet, how do we enforce that? How do we investigate that? And so it works both ways. And that's one of the reasons why the FBI and myself, we engage in this type of outreach and engagement to raise your collective awareness, because at the end of the day, you're the ones that are the voters. And if you think that this is something that needs to be addressed, it's to raise that level of attention to the decision makers, and that'll eventually empower agencies like the FBI. It'll empower students, it'll empower companies to do a better job at protecting you at the individual level.
All right, so I think we've got one more question coming up to the front, so let's do a lightning round to get through the last three.
Yep. Some great points that all of you have brought up. So the software industry recognized that when they were faced with threats, they had to legitimize and have white hat hackers. Can each of you talk about, when you see that white hat sort of approach being brought to biosecurity, and given that there's a lot of data that's potentially collected through all of these efforts, is there a role for software and computation and for public-private partnerships being, we all talk about Craig Venter.
So I suggest we just jump in, given that we've only got a couple minutes. So white hack, certainly, what that might look like is you expose a company that is unable to fulfill its obligation to screen an order against a select agent. I'd say that would be an example. Any more?
Three of those iGEM teams that you looked at earlier are practically doing this. So a team in China was checking out whether they could order things using personal credit cards. The team from Canada were checking how well that industry screening works. So there are already moves afoot. iGEM's a good one. We can talk about them more.
Right, and then also just cybersecurity alone needs to evolve too, because current cybersecurity applications all involved about securing, protecting data like financial information or classified sensitive. But in this near future where your genetics or even your social media or your wearable tech uploads are going to potentially have value as soon as it's aggregated, that environment, current cybersecurity solutions don't work. So absolutely, we need to engage the white hat and even aspects of the black hat to come up with novel security approaches in this future economy.
In the interest of time, do you want to take the last two questions quickly and we can
Let's
give
do
some
it.
final comments?
Hi, I'm a medical geneticist in Boston, and I'm running the first randomized trial of sequencing newborn babies, so very relevant to what and integrating that into their medical records. Can you comment a little bit more on what exactly are the kinds of risks if their genomes are hacked, and particularly in conjunction with their medical records? And number two, we're piloting this, no pun intended, in the US military in order to make sure that their medical care of active duty service members is sort of modernized. And I'm just starting that project, and I'd love to know if there's special considerations we should be thinking about in the military.
Do you want to take this last question too?
Sure, yeah.
Last comments?
We'll combine the comments.
Hello. I just want to bring to your attention, because you guys are obviously leaders in this community, the question of Hugo diversity and patenting of indigenous DNA by biotech companies. And I think that that's something really, really important when we're talking about the future of security and the future of rights, because we talked a little bit about babies not being able to give consent about their information being shared, etc. But in many indigenous communities, it's
Do you have a
considered.
question?
No, it's for you guys to bring with you to the future, basically. Just that we do have this very white approach that once you're 18, you can say yay or nay, but it's more a question of community. And I hope that that is something that you bring into the next conference and the next, because a lot is being done with patenting of,
Thank you.
DNA. Yeah.
Do you want to lead this one? On
Sure. I mean, we have to, so we're out of time, but I basically, I think that these are all great questions, and I'm sure we didn't hear many. And I think that, one of the reasons we need a biosecurity update in biotechnology is because we need the people who can ask those questions and answer them in new types of ways, incorporating issues that are very practical and tactical, like I'm doing this project, how do I incorporate security, all the way through how does genomic information and the sharing of genomic information enter into a security conversation. So I think biosecurity needs an update because we need an update to our people, and I hope you're one of those people, so please help participate in the future.
Yes. And real quickly, to also incorporate your question, which you can talk to me afterwards, but bottom line is that, again, the biotechnology update aspect is we need to come at this strategically, and what does this mean from at an individual level to does it mean impact on our national economy, to overarching national security, to overarching global engagement in the future. We really need to take a harder look at what does it all mean, because quite honestly, as I said, biosecurity has traditionally looked at a very narrow swath of the life sciences when it comes to just the dangerous bugs and toxins. Whereas you see the powerful applications coming with the dawn of biotech, that aspect of security absolutely needs to be broadened. And the update is really a euphemism. I mean, it really does need to look at the whole range of things, to include ongoing research projects to look at how we leverage data.
I would just highlight the Nagoya Protocol on benefit sharing that specifically addresses the issue of indigenous resources, and so that's one way to go into that topic. And secondly, would encourage you to have a look at the work being done in the UK, in particular the 100,000 Genomes Project and the UK Biobank, both of which deal with these issues of informed consent and to some extent also about what the implications of linking sequence data to public health records are.
So the gentleman who asked about genome hacking, I was going to say, well, what do you mean by hacking? But then, Ed, when you say, what do we mean by update? You're right. I mean, it's both sides, right?
Yeah.
It's the people who are, leading this field and the people who are going to be participating in this field. And the only way that we realize that, we're both getting our paths crossed is if we have these kinds of discussions. And so to the lady who says, let's bring more people in and have further discussions, I'd say, absolutely, let's do it again next year. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. I appreciate you all staying.